The name Enterprise is synonymous with a famous starship, but its origins go much further back than the 23rd century. Several real nautical ships and spacecraft bear the name, including NASA's first space shuttle and an aircraft carrier.
Its lineage is definitely nautical because you started with sailing ships and moved up to spaceships. And I think Gene Roddenberry, when he was working with Matt Jeffries on the first one, that was their attempt, that this is the sailing ship of space.
Gene picked the name. He felt that all of those ships should have some feeling of coming down through history. And of course, one of the first fine frigates that the U.S. Navy ever had was the Enterprise. And it came all the way up through the third or fourth aircraft carrier was the Enterprise. Then later there was still a later one, and that was the Enterprise. So it was picking up off of that. And in essence, if we ever had any other ships comparable to it, then it would pick up one of those names from the past. It could be the Wasp or the Saratoga or any of the other big carriers that came into World War II.
Admiral, we have found the nuclear vessel.
Well done, Team 2.
And Admiral, it is the Enterprise.
Understood. Kirk out.
Matt's designs, of course, are legendary in what he came up with. And although it's definitely a spaceship, it has the look, the feel, and the ambiance of being a sailing ship. The way the crew manipulates through the ship with their references to sailing vessels, and I believe at that time the Enterprise was called She, like sailing ships were. So every Enterprise basically follows in that footsteps of being a sailing ship, yet in space.
Just imagine what it was like. No engines, no computers, just the wind and the sea, the stars to guide you.
Gene Roddenberry has said that when he first conceived of Star Trek, he wanted the ship to be very advanced, but at the same time he didn't want it to be so complicated as to be not understandable. What he did was to use the naval metaphor, that is, to couch things in fairly contemporary naval terms so that even if you didn't know what a warp propulsion system is, you knew what a helm officer was, or you knew what a navigator was.
On our bridge of the new Enterprise for the television series, Enterprise, there's a dedication plaque. There has been a dedication plaque on every ship that bears the name Enterprise. There's a tradition there of carrying on the same tradition that is carried on in American, British, naval maritime history, where you may use the same name for a number of incarnations of the same ship or a different ship, but certainly with the same names. When you go to the Enterprise E, it's the 5th starship to bear the name.
In the second season episode, First Flight, we had 3 sailors from the aircraft carrier Enterprise who were the ship's Sailors of the Year, and as part of their honors, they made a cameo appearance on Enterprise. And so that was kind of neat. We had them the first year as flight deck officers on the hangar deck.
We did have the crew of the USS Houston here. The Houston was the submarine that Rick and Brandon and I went on before we conceived the physical aspects of the television series. We didn't copy anything down there, but we got a feeling, a really good feeling for what kind of place we were creating was. Not so comfortable as the Next Generation or even Kirk and Spock's Enterprise, but more submarine-like. Enterprise has always been considered a submarine in space because of the contained size of the sets. It's a smaller bridge, it's a smaller engine room, everything as big as it is, and it is much bigger than it probably will be when we finally do build a ship like Enterprise to travel into deep space. It's quite a lot more cramped feeling and for that reason more believable and realistic, knowing what nuclear submarines are like right now.
In 1976, NASA introduced the first space shuttle, and thanks to a lot of fan support, called it the Enterprise. Members of the original Star Trek cast and crew were invited to a special ceremony to watch it take flight.
NASA was going to roll out the first space shuttle. This was the one that was going to be flying piggyback on the back of 747s, taken up into the air and cut loose so they could practice landing it. A lot of fans had gotten together to put pressure on NASA to name the shuttle Enterprise.
Trekkies that did that, they got in touch with, apparently with thousands of cards and letters. They got to President Ford suggesting it, and he agreed. So he changed the name. I think the first one was a Discovery. But before it was completed or ready for its first free flight, it was renamed the Enterprise.
So we were all invited to come out for the unveiling. I was flying single-engine planes at the time, and this was out in the Mojave Desert where they were going to roll this thing out. I got in my little single-engine airplane in Santa Monica and flew it over to Mojave and landed at the airport there, got out of the plane and walked over to the hangar where we were all standing, the whole bunch of us, including Gene Roddenberry, and Carl Sagan was there, and Senator Barry Goldwater was there, and the Army Air Force band was there, and they opened this hangar doors and out rolls this thing, and they've been playing the theme from Star Trek. Da 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 da. Out comes the space shuttle. It was a great day.
It's funny, we were introduced to Governor Brown, and he said, "This is Matt Jeffries," and we shook hands. He said he designed the Enterprise, and the governor looked at me, and then he looked at the shuttle sitting on top of the 747. And looked back at me, and our friend said, "No, that was the spaceship from Star Trek."
Barry Goldwater made some reference to the fact that this was going to be the future of space travel, and that he hoped that there would be a Spock character on board or something like that. We got a big kick out of it.
It was a kind of ironic joke, because when NASA, who had loved Star Trek because of our ratings and the involvement in space that we brought to the American public, they got money from Congress as a result of our popularity. When they would have a rocket shot, our ratings would go up because of the symbiotic relationship we had.
We were there for that first flight when they took off. I never thought I could get my wife out of bed at 2 in the morning to drive to see an airplane fly. But we were out at the area before daybreak. So we saw the 747 take off with it. And then as they were climbing to altitude, we watched it on a big television screen. And then saw them kick it off. And in fact, Marianne even got a picture of the shuttle landing with her little Instamatic. And then attended the big party afterward.
When they named the first shuttle Enterprise, it was a sensation. And some people criticized it. We on the show thought, wow, isn't that fabulous? And then they weren't going to fly it. They were going to use it as a practice thing. So it wasn't going to be the first one up in the air. Wow, that was terrible. We all were defeated. And then they put it in the museum. So it is now the space shuttle that is viewed as the space shuttle. So it has more longevity than ever. So the joke is on the irony of fate.
The Space Shuttle Enterprise currently resides near Washington, D.C., in a special aviation center built by the Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum.
All those vessels were called Enterprise. One of the things I think Mike Ikuda came up with in the motion picture were the graphics of the previous Enterprises in the recreation room. You'll see them in the background, and a couple of them are Matt Jeffries drawings, and you had the Space Shuttle Enterprise, which was actually very new at that time. Wanting to carry that heritage along, I think Mike paved the way for that. In the TNG series, he did the same thing with kind of half cutouts of the ship. Carrying it through to First Contact, they were going to have an observation lounge where they wanted Enterprises again. And I thought of the idea, what do you say we do actual gold-plated models instead of relief or artwork? And Herman thought it was a great idea, and so we got model kits of what we could, built them, got them gold-plated, and the ones that didn't we had to build from scratch. and that carried to Enterprise. But since the show was a couple hundred years before, we wanted to take it back to something besides models, because following that path, models would be the logical later step. But going back in time, we wanted to do drawings. Jimmy Meese, the set decorator, goes, I need 4 drawings of Enterprises for the walls. Actually, it was 5. The timeline was real short, and I think I had 2 or 3 days to do them in. And I wound up being busy on other stuff, so I did them just on one night. And so we have the Enterprise Space Shuttle. At that time, I had both Enterprise aircraft carriers, one from World War II and the present nuclear-powered carrier. We have the Enterprise spaceship, of course, and then a sailing ship. I don't remember if it was due to space or a pick-and-choose situation, but they got rid of the World War II aircraft carrier and just kept the 4. And that's how those drawings came to be.
I think all of us, going back to Gene Roddenberry, are very proud to be associated with the Enterprise heritage, and it's fun to go back to the frigate, to the aircraft carrier, to the space shuttle, and just to see that this is yet another continuation of that illustrious name.
I always thought I'd get a shot at this chair one day.
Perhaps you still will. Somehow I doubt that this will be the last ship to carry the name Enterprise.